So he passed away on the third day of the month of Tammuz in the year 1994, which is 30 years to this day. I want to share a little bit of an understanding what the Rebbe was, what made him so special, and why people revere him and follow him so much, listen to his advice, ask him for blessings, even till this very day. So to share, I think the best way is with some stories. I'll start off with, there's a letter that the Rebbe wrote to a woman who wrote him a letter in the year 1956. The woman writes to the Rebbe that she feels very dejected, she feels incompetent, she's not productive in her lifestyle, she's a little useless, and she's asking the Rebbe for some guidance. The Rebbe responds to her, and his letter is printed today. They have it in the original language where it was written in Hebrew, and they have it also its translation today in English. The Rebbe responds by saying, I want you to remember that this thought that you have right now is a temporary state of mind. It's temporary and you can change it because it's just a thought. You have the power and talent to lead your life in a productive way, not just for yourself, but also for others. And the Rebbe says the best way to deal with this is by starting small steps with changing your habits, and then also changing it regarding how you deal with others. So for example, the Rebbe says, number one, staying in school, don't allow these thoughts of feeling not productive to cause you to leave school to wait till you'll feel productive. And number two, start doing actions to volunteer for groups, youth groups specifically, teaching them about Judaism. And the Rebbe finishes off with a powerful line, which I think is very applicable to every one of us. And the Rebbe says that in our current state of the Jewish people, we cannot afford to give up or lose any talent. Each and every individual is part of, and this is where I'm adding in my words, each and every individual is part of a jigsaw puzzle. We all together make up the greatness that God has in mind with the world and what its plan is. If one of us goes away, we're not just taking away our responsibility, but it's removing the completeness and the mission of the entire goal that we all have to work on together. There was a big activist, a Jewish activist, his name was Gordon Zaks. And there's a video of it where he comes to meet the Rebbe in the 1980s. And the Rebbe asks him, when he meets him in person, he says, I want to know, what are you doing regarding spreading Judaism, especially regarding education of Jewish children? The Rebbe said, we spoke about it last time. I want to know, what are you accomplishing? And he thinks for a moment and he says, Rebbe, you're amazing. I met you 19 years ago. That was the last time we met, and that's what you spoke about. And I'm shocked that you still remember what it is that we spoke about then, and you're asking me a follow-up on that question. The Rebbe responds to him and he says, what good does it do for the Jewish community if I'm amazing? My goal is not to hear if I'm amazing. My goal is to hear a response. What is it that you're doing for the Jewish community? If you want to sum up what a Rebbe is, it's not just another rabbi. It is someone who is fully dedicated for the goal of the Jewish people being successful in their accomplishing their connection to God. A great transformational moment in people's lives is when they find someone who believes in them more than they believe in themselves. The reason why people were so attracted to the Rebbe is because he believed in each and every Jew more than people believed in themselves. It was going to a therapist who you know is not just speculating or trying to make you feel good, but actually knows the truth about you deep down in your soul and is revealing it to you. It feels so liberating. It takes away the doubts that normally we as human beings have, where we're unsure, well, maybe I'm just trying to push myself to believe things that aren't true. Maybe they're just telling it to me because I'm paying them money and they want me to keep coming back, make me feel good. The Rebbe really believed in everybody's great potential. He saw the greatness that each Jew has, regardless if they have what others have or not. Sometimes people feel, well, I'm not a good writer and therefore I cannot write these books, or I'm not a good speaker and therefore I cannot do this, or I'm not someone that's very popular. I don't have a lot of friends. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a position in the community. I'm just a simple person. And with each person, the Rebbe always really challenged them to find the area where they can bring out their greatness. Even if it's just you have friends, invite them over for a Hanukkah party, for a Shabbat dinner, invite them over for a Torah study with them one-on-one. Even if you're not a learned person that knows everything, you could say, let's figure this out together. There's a great story that brings out this point. There was once a group of high school students that came to their Chabad Rebbe for a meeting. There was a rabbi that brought them, and they were allowed to ask any question. One of the students had a little more chutzpah, and he asks the Rebbe, he says, I hear they say about you that you could perform miracles. Is it true? Rabbi, tell me the truth. Do you know how to perform miracles? So the Rebbe said, the power to perform miracles, it's not given to the select few, it's given to everyone. Everyone has that ability, and the Rebbe said, I'll explain to you what I mean by performing a miracle right now. He said, if you, as a high school student, take on a resolve, take on a commitment to do something for your spiritual and godly soul that until this moment you thought was impossible because of your physical nature. We all put limitations on ourselves by saying, nah, that's not for me. My mother didn't do it. I'm not comfortable with it. I haven't done it before. And we restrict ourselves by convincing ourselves that there's some problem or some issue and we cannot do it. The Rebbe said, if you can push yourself more than you were physically and naturally going to, but by understanding that you have a godly soul that's more powerful than you imagine, that's what we would call a miracle. The miracle is doing what's not normal, doing more than you expected or more than you thought possible. And we all can perform miracles and shock ourselves. Or as the saying goes, how do we make someone laugh? Joke. How do we make God laugh? If God is ultimately aware of everything, how do we make him laugh? When we shock God with our actions, we say, I wasn't going to do that, but I'm going to prove that I'm going to push myself more than I would normally do it, just for the sake of making God have a good day. I want God to say, wow, you really impressed me. I did not think you can do that. To put it in other words, to sum it up, I would say the Rebbe is someone who takes God extremely seriously. When we discuss God, we think of it as, I have my house, I have my business, I have my family, and just like I have yoga classes, I have also a little bit of God classes that I go to as well. But it doesn't permeate our life in the degree that every aspect of godliness is what rules all our decisions throughout our day. By the Rebbe, it was when he spoke about what God says in the Torah must be true to 100% of the degree. It's not a question. It's not a doubt. It's not something that, well, the Torah says this, but let me see what my doctor says. Let me see what my accountant says, or I'm really scared of this lawsuit or this case or this election or this person in charge of this HOA or this type of community. For the Rebbe, it was God's in charge of the world and there's nothing to fear other than God. I want to bring out an example for it. When there was the Six-Day War, 1967, leading up to the Six-Day War, I believe you would remember it a lot better than I, there was a lot of fear. It wasn't like everybody knew Israel's going to win a war. This was, imagine a lead up where we know something disastrous is going to happen, and people were assuming that it was going to be tens of thousands dead. They were sending out the rabbis and the Israeli military to find parks that they would transform into burial sites, because they weren't sure if they're going to win the war, and if they will, how many people would be lost. There was such fear in the community that Prime Minister Levi Eshkol at the time gave a speech, and you could look it up online, and he was stuttering during his speech. He himself was very unsure when you have all the Arab armies surrounding you, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, even Iraq was participating, and others were giving ammunition. They didn't think that they could win this battle. The Rebbe at the time spoke a few days before the war started at the Lag BaOmer parade. During that time, the Rebbe quoted a verse from the Torah. He said, the Torah says that the eyes of God are upon the land of Israel from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And therefore, he said, there is nothing to fear. If God says that he looks at the land of Israel and he it, then we have nothing to be scared of. The Rebbe spoke with a sure tone, and he was positive that if this is what God says, that's what's going to happen. There isn't a question, well, maybe this won't be the case. And the Rebbe encouraged us further, and he said, the Torah also tells us, V'ra'u kol amei haaretz, all the nations of the land will see, ki shem Hashem nikra alecha, God's name is upon you, v'yar'u mimeka, they will be scared and fear you. The Talmud explains, what's this? The nations will see the name of God upon you and they'll fear you. It's referring to the tefillin that we put on our heads. So the Rebbe came up with a campaign to encourage Jews throughout the world, and especially people in the land of Israel, soldiers, to put on tefillin. Chabad students, Chabad disciples went out all over putting on tefillin with everybody. And sure enough, there was a huge miracle, as we all know, where instead of it being a defeat, where Israel might have been destroyed, within 6 days they were able to overcome all of their enemies. We could look back and say, well, it's because of this intelligence and that. But we see with October 7th, we had a lot of intelligence and a lot of weapons and a lot of infrastructure and a lot of research done, and yet terrible disasters happen. But yet we see by the 6-day war, the miracle that happened was above and beyond anybody's wildest belief. Even Israel didn't think that they would be that successful. For the Rebbe, that was something that was, without a doubt, going to happen. So there's a specific story regarding what happened then. Before the 6-day war, the Rebbe was telling everybody not to be scared and also not to leave, because the US government and many other governments actually sent out to all of their citizens to leave Israel because it's a danger zone. The Rebbe told his disciples and anyone that would listen to him, they printed it in the newspapers in Israel. The Chabad Rebbe encourages people to stay in the land of Israel, nothing to fear. At the time, there was a Chabad yeshiva student who was studying in the land of Israel, and his parents and grandmother really wanted him to come home, but he said, my Rebbe said not to leave, I'm not leaving. Now, this grandmother of this yeshiva student was actually a Holocaust survivor, and she was very scared. She was petrified. She felt like this is Holocaust 2.0, and she was trying everything she can to get her grandson, who was the only grandson to her, to come home. She happens to be the aunt of Caspar Weinberger. Caspar Weinberger was the Secretary of Defense for President Ronald Reagan at the time, and she calls up her nephew, because she was the aunt. She calls up Caspar and says, you have to do me a favor and convince the Chabad Rebbe about how dire the situation is, because you know as the Secretary of Defense, and convince him grandson. So Caspar sent his right-hand man to the Rebbe. They had a meeting, and he said, Rebbe, we want to tell you from the US government that we have intelligence, and we see that the situation in the land of Israel is terrible. It's really bad, and it's going to be a catastrophic result by this war. Please let this boy go home. Tell him that he should go home. So the Rebbe said, I appreciate you sharing with me your intelligence, but I have also intelligence just like you do. And my intelligence tells me that the God of Israel, God in heaven, doesn't slumber, nor does he sleep, and therefore Israel is going to be safe. There's no need to fear. So this person tells him, he says, Rebbe, I don't know if you understand, but this boy that's in the land that we're talking about, he is an only grandchild, an only child and an only grandchild to a Holocaust survivor. You have to let him go home. So the Rebbe responds and he says, every Jew in the world is an only child to God. You're telling me that an only child is different. I look at every Jew as an only child. And therefore, if I say that for others, it's because my intelligence tells me that I'm sure about it. Sure enough, after the war, this fellow the right-hand man of Caspar Weinberger, came back, and the Rebbe told him in a half-joking way, he says, "Nu, what do you say about my sources of intelligence? Is it better?" Why was the Rebbe saying this? The Rebbe wasn't working behind the scenes with greater secret agents and Mossad than the regular people. But for the Rebbe, what God says in the Torah, he wasn't doubtful about it. Is it true or not? He was positive that it's the right thing. He didn't have a question. And for him, he saw it with clarity that this is the truth. There's another great example of a story, and there's many like this, but I'll share one that I just heard yesterday from the father of the girl that the story happened with. He shares it online. You can watch it as well. This rabbi is a famous rabbi in Israel in Migdal HaEmek. His name is Rabbi Grossman, and he goes all around the world. He speaks, he lectures. This rabbi shares the story as follows. He says he has a daughter called Chaya. Now she's married. Her last name is Hennig, but at the time she was still a young girl. And at one point, his daughter got an infection in her eye. There was an infection. It was really bad. He didn't know what to do. They were going from doctor to doctor. And one guy said the problem is the eye. Another guy said the problem is the skin. Another guy said it was this issue and that issue. But after 8 months of trying everything, they were unsuccessful. They couldn't figure out what the issue was. So he wrote in a letter to the Rebbe, sent it in by mail from Israel, asking the Rebbe for a blessing. At the same time, people told him that there was a doctor in New Jersey who is a real expert for the eye, especially for pediatric. Go to him and maybe he can help you. So Rabbi Grossman flies to the US and he brings with him all of the documents, all the scans and all of the medical diagnosis that they've given to him in Israel. And he brings it, he meets this doctor, and the doctor says, I have to see the girl. This is not going to help me. I got to see with my own eyes, make my own tests. I'm not going to base my assumptions off of others' research. So Rabbi Grossman calls up his family in Israel. He says, please send my daughter, and I'll meet her at the airport. Sure enough, his daughter flies in. She comes to the US. They visit the doctor then the next day. And the doctor checks out the daughter. He says, okay, we're going to do some scans. We're going to do some tests. And we'll be in touch in 3 days once I have time to look over and see what I diagnosed on this situation. But it's definitely looks very serious. So they do all the tests. They take everything in. After they're done, they have to wait now 3 days. So the daughter, Chaya, says to her father, I would love to go see the Chabad Rebbe. So they travel from New Jersey to New York. And they're waiting. This wasn't at a time when the Rebbe was accepting people privately. But every day when the Rebbe would come for services, once in a while, people would stop him with a quick question. If it was something urgent, they really needed a blessing or some help. So Rabbi Grossman's waiting on the line over there where the Rebbe would walk by. And as soon as the Rebbe comes by, he steps out into the line, into the path of the Rebbe. And he says, Rebbe, this is my daughter that I wrote to you about that needs a speedy recovery for her eye. The Rebbe gives a look at the daughter, and the Rebbe tells the father, check the mezuzot in your home, which means inspect the mezuzah that you have on the door. The Torah tells us that on the doorposts of our houses and on our gates of our cities, we should put a mezuzah, which is 2 paragraphs of the Torah written on parchment. And the Torah tells us that we put it there to remind us of God. And the way the commentaries explain is that it also is Shomer Daltot Yisrael, Shin Dalad Yud. It's God protecting and giving us safety. So right away, he calls up his family in Israel. He says, take down the mezuzot in our home, send it into a scribe, have him inspect them. They send it in. He said, the scribe gets back to them very fast, and he says, they mark down each mezuzah where it was in the home. The mezuzah that was on the doorpost of his daughter's room, the word in the Shema that says einecha, that it should be for a reminder of 4 between your eyes. So the word einecha means eyes. It was missing that word. That word was completely erased and scrubbed out. Totally not there. Right away, they ordered a new mezuzah. They put it on the daughter's home. He said from when this procedure started, 12 hours later, he said his daughter's eye as if nothing was wrong with it from the beginning. He was shocked, and they were thinking, do they even have to go back to the doctor? Just as a courtesy, because the doctor made special space for them, they went back to the doctor at their official appointment, and he said the doctor couldn't believe what happened. He said, I can't believe that this is the same girl that I saw just a few days ago, and now that her situation is completely healed. There's nothing wrong with it. He couldn't explain it. Rabbi Grossman told him the story that happened with the Rebbe. Rabbi Grossman shares that 18 years later, he went back to Teaneck, New Jersey. When he was back in Teaneck, a guy comes over to him, and he hugs Rabbi Grossman, and Rabbi Grossman is looking at him and doesn't recognize the guy. The guy has a beard. He's praying in the synagogue. He's wearing his talit. He looks like a man that's observant. And he tells Rabbi Grossman, he says, I am Dr. Greenglass, that you brought your daughter 18 years ago. He said, when I saw what you said, that because of him changing the mezuzah, the daughter was healed, he said, that gave me a whole new understanding of God and his Torah. I started getting more involved. I started praying. I started coming to synagogue, studying. And he said, now me and my family were observant, practicing Jews, fully involved with our Judaism. That story comes from the Rebbe not doubting the truth of the Torah. If the Torah says that the mezuzah is going to bring healing, the Rebbe was positive that when someone had a problem, the Rebbe wouldn't say, run to this doctor, run to that doctor, check out, and then also say a prayer. By the Rebbe, it was, for sure, there's a spiritual cause that's the leading reason for this. And then also, you could go to the doctor, but let's check out what is behind it, because God, his Torah, and his words are sure. It's true. They're positive. I have no doubt about it. I want to show over here a little clip, a video, which is the Rebbe really empowering each individual, understanding that the job cannot be done just by the select few, those that are involved, those that are in leadership roles, but really seeing the greatness within each and every Jew. So we'll share this short clip.
I was so curious about him. Having my dad rave about the Lubavitcher Rebbe from the time I was born. Here I am, an American-born college boy, sitting, and there's the Rebbe right there. He asked me what I do, and I said, Gates of College. I'm going for a master's degree, and I'm taking up teaching. And he said, Ich habe gegangen zu college. And I said, what did you study? No, he said, my field was electrical engineering. He said, but I preferred to turn the lights on in people's souls.
Was sehr sicher, bei jeder Menschen in seiner Arbeit, wenn tut in dem, nicht sein, wie ein Mensch darf tun, es muss in die Kadruf der Kirche ist, wo der Rebischter hat ihm gegeben, wird ein Licht, was beleicht, nicht nur allein und sein Mischpoche und sein Stadt, nur die ganze Welt herum.
Every person has a soul, a Yiddish Neshama, and it's like a spark, like a flame. When I went home, he said he would like, if I could, to form groups of young people in one way or another, social activities, religious activities, bring them in to Jewish life, see that that pilot light or that flame is lit, brightening it, illuminating it.
I taught a course in Hashkafa and Jewish philosophy. What is Judaism? Basic concept of Judaism. I get a phone call, and it's from Lubavitch. I think it was Rabbi Groner. And he said, we understand you have a sabbatical. The Rebbe wants to meet with you. Rebbe wants to meet with you. You can imagine what a fantastic thing that is. He said, the Rebbe would like you to go around the world, and we want you to speak to the Makar of Jews. I said, Are you sure you have the right person? Do you know what I look like? I don't look like a Lubavitcher, and I don't wear a black hat. I come in, I'm asked to be seated, and the Rebbe explains to me, was me wil van euch is to go to the Far East, Singapore, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Australia, New Zealand. Je zult redden ze Jiden, mekaar zijn Jiden. You should teach them. Tell them the things that you, as a Rav and a Melamed Torah, know could ignite the spark that's in their souls. After I came back, almost 3 months, being mekar of Jews of all kinds, I met with the Rebbe again. He said, and I knew this about you. You are a chassid in camouflage. You're a chassid in camouflage.
Wo das konnte jeder konnte ein Spiel sein, in einer bestimmten Maß auf einer Ruhe.
My husband and I were leading a very social life. My husband was a doctor in the community, and we were invited to many parties. I told the Rebbe that I was very busy socially, but I felt empty inside, like I had a terrible void in my life. And he just looked at me and he said, there's Judaism, you have your religion. The Rebbe told me that my husband's a plastic surgeon and that he makes people beautiful on the outside and that I should make people beautiful on the inside. And I took that very seriously. I tried to give people spiritual meaning to their life. I would invite them to our house for Shabbos, and many people came. I would set the table days ahead of time so that when the people came to my house, I could try to fulfill some of the job that the Rebbe had given me, to give them some type of feeling for their religion.
Rebbe, thank you and happy Hanukkah.
Happy that he likes Hanukkah.
Thank you, Rebbe.
It must be matching on the outside also.
Thank you, Rebbe.
That is the message of Hanukkah.
Thank you.
What some people do in such a manner that it will light the street around your home.
Thank you, Rebbe. I
Yes.
need it in my neighborhood.
Yes, very much bless you.
Thank you.
Subsequently, every year at Hanukkah, we light this giant menorah that lights up a large portion of our street.
Die Eigenschaft von Licht ist doch, als sie verspricht sich herum und herum, in alle Kavim und in alle Richtungen. A bin nur stellt nicht weg, a Sach, wo soll ich verhalten, ist auch demol beteva hoheit, in der Eigenschaft von Lichtigkeit ist, als sie hat nicht in Grenzen, wo sie der gerecht, at Kafsvitevo.
So, to explain a little bit more about a Rebbe, I want to use this example. How would you define a businessman? What do you call a businessman? What makes him different than everybody else? I think an easy definition would be a successful businessman is one who sees opportunity. You could see opportunity in something that no one else sees. Because if you're following the herd and seeing what everybody else sees, you're just going to make what everybody else. If you want to be successful and above more than everyone else, you have to look how to see an opportunity in areas where no one else sees potential. The Rebbe was summing that up in each individual. He never looked at an individual and says, that person, I think they're just a failure. Or maybe they were just born trying to be something, but they never made it. With each individual, he says, if God created that person, then there must be inherent value in this person just for who they are. And if I don't see it, the problem is not with them, the problem is with me. Not just with people, but if you look at the Rebbe's responses, today they already printed more than 35 volumes of his responses. During his lifetime, he's given to people responses of more than just a few words, over 200,000. He's been responding to people's letters, requests, whether it was big politicians and officials, to simple children who would send him sometimes coloring pages as a gift. The Rebbe would always, if you want to sum up how he would respond to a crisis and a challenging situation, is seeing what did God have in mind with this problem. There's nothing that's out of God's plan. There's no place or situation that's a mistake that wasn't supposed to happen, whether it's the person you married, whether it's the child you have, whether it's this community you find yourself in. He always would look to see what's the gift, the talent, the ability, the opportunity that's in each situation. We spend so much of our life trying to say, why do I have this circumstance? And we waste the potential that we could have been successful in the most challenging situations. If God gave it to you, trust him that he knows what he's giving to each person. The Talmud uses the phrase just as much as we don't load onto a camel more than it can handle. The Rebbe would say that phrase is so too God doesn't load onto a human being more than he can handle. So for each person, what they were given, what they have, is exactly what they need to be successful. Because the Rebbe was in touch with this godly spark, he was able to feel out what every Jew needs, even those who weren't directly communicating with him. There's a fascinating story that Rabbi Grossman shares. He says he once came to New York, and the Rebbe's secretary calls him up and says, the Rebbe asked if you could go to visit a Jew in the prison in Sing Sing. There's a Sing Sing prison in New York, max security prison, all the way upstate to the west side of New York, like below Buffalo, Rochester area. And the Rebbe asked him that there's probably either some big supporter of Chabad or some Chabad Hasidic disciple that's there. Why else would the Rebbe ask him? He travels to this prison and he finds there's one Jew who is a doctor from Flatbush. He was in there because he was a little bit not careful and made a mistake with one of his patients. He gave him a shot that unfortunately caused the patient's death, and he was found guilty of negligence, and therefore he was sitting in jail at this time. And he comes to this fellow, this Jew, and he says, my name is Rabbi Grossman, and I came to visit you on behalf of the Chabad Rebbe to encourage you, to bring you some joy and excitement. The fellow starts crying. He's crying, and he tells Rabbi Grossman, he said, I want you to know that I was sitting here in jail, far away from everybody and anybody that I knew, and I was feeling so down, lonely, the fact that I'm going to be here for so many years. He said I was attempting and contemplating, not attempting, I was contemplating suicide. And he said, I asked God, I said, God, if you're out there and you see me in my struggle and you know that I'm here and there's a purpose for this, please give me a sign. He says, I was just asking God to say, am I here by a total mistake that I made and there's no purpose with me being in jail? Or is there some reason and something and you see me, show me that you remember me? And he said, and then you show up. He said that totally shifted my understanding and belief that God hears prayers, that God can understand, God can communicate to us in ways when we reach out, we might not get the response at the time in an exact way we wanted. But ultimately, the Rebbe, one way or another, you could say, had this idea and understanding from God that he should communicate with this Jew and show him that the Rebbe is aware and cares for each and every one. I want to share one last story, which is personal because my father is the one that the story happened with. He shared it with us many times. And I think for me, it's one of the most fascinating stories of the Chabad Rebbe, which really brings up a great lesson of how much he sees and cares for each individual. But I guess before that story, I'm happy to open up if anybody who has any questions. Don't forget to unmute if you are asking a question.
Hi, Rabbi. My question is that I have a very old friend who is going through some well, let's say, I guess mental problems. And I've tried talking to her about thinking positively and not negatively. Um, I asked her today if she would do one thing, and that would be to light Shabbos candles. What would be, I have to email the information to her. Is the best information, do you think, off of Chabad.org to show her how to do this?
Well, first of all, that's beautiful that you're number one, not just helping your friend, but that your advice for her is to bring some godliness, some of God's light into the home. So I want to commend you for that. That is very nice that that's the path you're taking. And yes, Chabad.org does have great information on the blessing, how to recite it in Hebrew, English. And I would just give her verbally as well some basic information. So for example, some people are unaware that Shabbat candles should only be lit before sunset.
Right.
Once sunset arrives, it's better not to light them than to light them. But that's great. I think bringing more light into the home and seeing how much she's open for, it might be that she's interested in coming to a study class. I don't know if she's just feeling down or if it's more than just that.
She's very depressed. And I
Hmm.
can't really ask her to study or do anything like that. She's not in that place. But I thought if she could do one thing, just one thing, it
Yeah,
might.
for sure. I think that is great. That is great to ask her lighting Shabbat candles. I think that's beautiful. Yeah. And of course, saying a prayer for her as well. You
Yeah.
have her name, Hebrew name, saying some Psalms, writing in, which is customary as well. We write in a letter to the Chabad Rebbe. You can ask for a speedy recovery for her. And just having her know even that you're thinking about her and that you care is already amazing.
Okay. I'll keep that up.
Yeah, beautiful. Any other questions?
A lot of quiet people.
So I'll share this story. And actually, you know what, before sharing the story, there's a beautiful song that I'll share first. This is like a shorter version of the whole song. If you like it, you can always search it later online and hear it at the longer version. This song is called Shamil. It was a song that the Chabad Rebbe would sing a lot. He actually taught it to the Chabad community. He would teach different Hasidic melodies to the community at the holiday of Simchat Torah. A beautiful song, and as you'll read on as the song goes through, it's without words. It's going to go through some of the captions will relate the story behind the song and what it's representing in our lives, the struggle of how our soul really yearns to be versus how it is, but the belief that ultimately things will be good in the end. That was a song that the Rebbe taught, and it was very dear and special to him. He would sing it often at the gatherings. A Hasidic melody is, the way the Rebbe puts it, is the pen of the soul. When we talk, we're revealing our thoughts, but the way the soul communicates is through music. Yeah.
Is there ever going to be another Rebbe?
My assumption is no. And the Rebbe, before he passed away, he gave the following statement. He said, I did everything I can to lead and bring Mashiach. From now on, I'm giving it over to each and every one of you. You could say, since the times from Moses, when we always had a Jewish leader that cared and was involved with every Jew, there was always someone, whether it was Moses or it was Maimonides or whether it was Rashi or it was the Baal Shem Tov, until Chabad Rebbe, there was always a leader for the Jewish people that really put it at the forefront, not just his own community and his own synagogue, but every Jew wherever they find themselves. I think today we're holding the last moments before the Mashiach comes, before the final redemption, as the Rebbe said again and again. And now it was given over as a task to each and every one of us to be the Rebbe. Each and every one of us was given, like you could call it, the last jump before you get to the finish line is, can you do this yourself? You can look at the Jewish people's history as raising a child till he finally can become a full adult that can do things on their own. We started off in the beginning, Moses took the Jews out of Egypt. He did everything for them. He had to give them food, he had to give them water. Every time they complained, he had to bear their kvetch like a little child that just needs his diapers changed for him. The Jewish people were a real handful. They weren't easy people to deal with, ungrateful, always crying about they want to go back to Egypt. You know, that short-term memory. Do you not remember that you were slaves in Egypt and you were put into suffering? And yet they're crying about the cucumbers and the leeks and the watermelon, the garlic that they had there. You could call that like a child that's born. Very selfish, very narcissistic, ungrateful. And then God shows them big miracles. He does everything for them. But as time went on, the open miracles, like splitting of the sea and having manna fall from heaven, became less and less. And more God wanted to see the Jewish people, can you stand on your own 2 feet? There comes a time where God says, I want to see if you can make your great decisions without me watching your back. As there was once a principal that said, I don't care what the girls do in my school. She says, what I care is, what are they going to do when they leave my school? If you want to know if you educated someone well, not what are they going to do when there's cameras, teachers, principals, and rewards and punishments right there in their eyes. What are they going to do when no one's watching, when they grow up and they're free to do as they please? You could say the same thing with the Rebbe leading the Chabad people and throughout the generations having guidance. And then there comes a time where today everybody can be a leader. We look at the ability of the internet, the ability of technology, the fact that every guy today can have his own podcast and have his own crowd, and you don't have to be some big professor, you don't have to be some guy working in a TV station, building up your career for dozens of years. There's people that overnight became famous, whether it was they made a video or they wrote a song or they did this. That in the secular society is not just a chance that happens to be coinciding with this time. That's God creating a situation where everything was created for his purpose of changing the world. He made that ability where today everyone can have huge effects on society. We do one small deed and we share it online, put it on Facebook, that we assisted this person, we cared for someone else, we donated charity to a certain cause, and it has ripple effects. Each and every one of us has the ability today to be a leader like we've never given before. Today, there's so many possibilities for people to lead in their own environment that my personal belief is that that's why there isn't another Rebbe. It's really, the challenge now is given to us, each and every one of us. Sure. So I want to share this story. My father, may he live and be well, still involved with senior homes in the tri-state area of New York. So New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, but mainly it turned into just New York itself, the 5 boroughs. where he helps senior homes, adult daycare centers, hospitals, all facilities where they have individuals who are not fully capable of taking care of themselves, but they need extra assistance. So specifically the ones that are not as populated with Jewish people and they don't have their own full-time rabbi, the ones that might just have a few people, or they're just housing people for a few days, a few weeks, if it's a rehab, he helps them with Jewish holidays, classes, having Jewish artifacts. If someone wants tefillin, someone needs kosher food, someone needs to speak to a rabbi, having a funeral, and he assists with all of these different homes throughout the New York area. One time, he went to a specific home, and he was delivering a message that he wanted to share with the crowd from the Chabad Rebbe. He said, let me tell you a little bit about the Rebbe, and then you could understand that he's someone that's trustworthy when he gives a prediction. He said, throughout the Rebbe's history, the Rebbe was giving people blessings, guidance, and to the Jewish community in large, and the Rebbe never made a mistake. There was never a time where the Rebbe told someone, do this, and then turned out it was a fatal, flawed decision. It was bad advice. The Rebbe wasn't speaking from speculation. He wasn't speaking because he knew the markets from studying Wall Street. He was someone that was speaking from the truth of the Torah and God, and therefore he was positive and sure with what he said. Many people came for blessings, should they do a surgery or not, and the Rebbe would tell them either yes or no. And there was once a person who came to the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, how do you know to tell people yes or no to do a surgery? What do you know about these medical fields and questions? You haven't studied what all these doctors know. So the Rebbe said, I'll give you an example. Architect puts together the building plan. He doesn't need to know how to connect the pipes like the plumber does. And he doesn't need to know how to connect electricity like the electrician does. He knows how to make the plans. And then each individual does the job that they need to do. But the architect doesn't have to ask them. He looks at the plans and he knows what should be done. He said, I don't need to be the plumber or the electrician. I don't need to be the doctor or the business consultant. I need to be someone that looks at the plans, which is God's Torah. If one is really in tune with the Torah and its message, they see the blueprint of the world and they know what should be done without doubt. So the Rebbe was helping people throughout his lifetime, and my father was sharing this idea. He was telling them how the Rebbe didn't make mistakes, whether it was the Six-Day War telling people they'll be safe, whether it was the Scud missiles that came during Saddam Hussein's war, during the Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein shot 39 Scud missiles at Israel, and people were really scared. They thought that there's going to be gas in these missiles, and that people have to have gas masks. And the Rebbe said Israel's going to be a safe place. So people, when they saw there wasn't much damage done, where miraculously, with 39 Scud missiles falling, no one died directly because of these missiles. People thought, well, maybe these Scud missiles are like these little ping pong balls. And then they shot just a few at American bases, and they had over 100 casualties at one American base because of one of these Scud missiles that landed there. So it was a huge miracle with buildings being destroyed and yet no one being harmed directly from these Scud missiles. And the Rebbe said it beforehand when people were scared that it's going to be another time of Israel's destruction. And he said, this same Rebbe, my father's telling the crowd, told us that Mashiach, the Messiah, is ready to come any moment, and it's our job to be ready to greet him by doing more acts of goodness and kindness, by living in a mind state, a state of mind that Mashiach is coming any moment that transforms every decision that we do in our life. We don't look at life of saying it's a random mutation that I'm here, but rather there's a goal that we're trying to bring the Messiah, and each and every act that we do is bringing him closer, and we don't know. It might be the one time we gave charity that tipped the scale to turn over the world to be a better place. As my father is saying this, a guy in the crowd stands up and he says, Rabbi, you're lying. That's not the truth. So my father gets taken aback. He tells the guy, what do you disagree with? He says, you said that everything the Rebbe said happened. And when he says, therefore, that Mashiach, the Messiah, is coming, it's going to happen. He said, I have a personal story with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was wrong. So So my father never heard this before. He said, I'm happy to hear your story. What happened? He said, I am a Holocaust survivor. This was already a senior citizen going back some 20 years ago. He says, I survived the Holocaust. I came to the US and I decided don't want to have anything to do with Judaism. I was sick and tired of it. I said, we're done with this. I'm going to live the American dream. He said, I got married over here. I had a daughter, and we didn't raise our daughter Jewish at all. He said, one day, my daughter comes home and she says, Dad, I have the bashert. I have the one I'm going to marry. Please, I would like to introduce you to my fiance. So I start speaking to him, and I find out that he's not Jewish. He said, I turn to my daughter and I say, you can't do this to me. I'm the only one from my family that survived the Holocaust. I made it here. And now you're going to go ahead and marry someone that's not Jewish? Please. My daughter looks at me and says, Dad, what are you talking about? You didn't care about anything when it comes to Judaism. We haven't celebrated any holidays. We didn't go to Shabbat. We didn't keep kosher. We didn't study what Judaism means, the Torah. Why is this all of a sudden important to you? Who decided that marrying Jewish is important and everything else is not? What about Yom Kippur holidays? So the father is pleading with his daughter. He says, yes, I know I made some decisions in my life, but please, do me a favor. I would love for my only daughter to marry Jewish. And the daughter is not hearing any of it. She said, Dad, I'm really sorry. This is the guy I found. He's the right one for me. So the father was devastated, and he said, I went to rabbis, and I went to therapists, and I went to anybody that would hear or try to help me communicate this message to my daughter. And he said, people gave me blessings, and people gave me advice, but nothing worked. My daughter was continuing on her path. So he said, out of desperation, someone saw how difficult my situation was. He says, let me give you advice. Go to the Chabad Rebbe. He's the only one that can help you. So he said, I waited in line. Sunday, the Rebbe would give out dollars. He said, I waited online. Finally, I get a chance to meet the Rebbe. And I said, Rebbe, my daughter wants to marry a non-Jew. So they said, the Rebbe gives a look at me and he says, everything will work out as it's supposed to, and you will see it. He said, those were the words the Rebbe said. Everything will work out as it's supposed to, and you will see it. He said, I was sure. The Rebbe is saying it's going to work out as it's supposed to, means my daughter won't marry the non-Jew. And he said, let me tell you what happened. He said, my daughter went ahead and married the non-Jew. She has children from this non-Jew. And how can you have the audacity to tell me and everyone here that whatever the Rebbe says happens? So my father said, I had nothing to say. I was stuck. You know, someone's disproving me and saying a story happened with him. So I kept quiet. He said, now that this guy got the microphone and got the crowd and he started on a rant, he kept going and he started adding more fuel to the flame. And he says, you know, he tells the whole crowd, it's not just the Chabad Rebbe, it's all these rabbis. All these rabbis, they're all not good. They're all not nice. So my father said, I don't know why, but I told the fellow, I said, tell me, what do you have against all rabbis? I understand the Rebbe told you something and it didn't happen. Okay, fair and square, you have your complaint. But what do you have against all rabbis? So he says, he tells my father, he says, when I wanted to divorce my wife, the rabbis weren't giving me the divorce. They said they can't help me out with it. They can't give a divorce. So my father says, why not? What was the issue? He said, they told me that my wife wanted to do a conversion and started, but she never converted. And because she didn't convert, therefore she's not completely Jewish, and a divorce, according to Jewish law, is necessary when a Jew marries a Jew. But if a Jew is marrying a non-Jew, then it's not a procedure where we would do a Jewish divorce. It's a different procedure, but they wouldn't give a regular get. As soon as my father heard that, his eyes lit up and he turned to this fellow and he said, wow, thank you for sharing that point. And let me explain to you something. He says, if your wife never converted properly and isn't Jewish, that means that your daughter is not Jewish. So as much as you maybe felt and believed that your daughter has Jewish blood, but according to Jewish law, the Judaism follows the mother. So if your wife wasn't Jewish, your daughter is not Jewish. The Rebbe didn't tell you, he says, the words you told me was everything's going to turn out as it's supposed to and you will see it. The Rebbe didn't tell you your daughter's not going to marry the non-Jew. The Rebbe said everything will turn out as it's supposed to. What's supposed to happen is that your daughter, who's not Jewish, should marry a non-Jew. On the contrary, if she married a Jew, then that would be a problem for him. So it's beautiful exactly what happened, that your daughter, who wasn't Jewish because your wife wasn't, married a non-Jew, And he said, not only that, the fact that you told me the Rebbe said, and you will see it, means the Rebbe foresaw that there's going to come a time when you will eventually realize this. And he said, I'm glad to hear that I'm going to be that messenger. And my father said it took him a while, and he explained to this fellow, and he went through about the concept of conversion. And at one point, the guy started understanding and realizing where the problem that he didn't want his daughter to do is exactly what he did. And that's a lot of times the way we educate our children, things that we did wrong, we assume that they shouldn't do our same mistakes. And my father said, after a long time of explaining to this fellow, the guy says, you know, Rabbi, you're right. My wife wasn't Jewish. When she would get drunk, she would curse out the Jews and curse me out because I'm Jewish. Says, Rabbi, you're right. And so I think that story, which I heard from my father many times, happened with him. It is fascinating in that degree of the foresight that the Rebbe had of seeing the godliness, the soul of each individual, not just what's on the surface. Would love to open up for any more questions if anybody has.
That was a great story. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Who is that?
I have a question.
Sure.
When you say about the miracle and the mezuzahs and I understand all that, but how do you deal with when bad things happen, when bad things happen to good people? I don't want to say bad things, but when someone's in hospice, I mean, what do you tell them? Keep working on the mezuzah? I mean, what is the language that we should be using to understand when things are happening that will happen, like death?
Right. Which I think is a great question. God doesn't tell us if you have a mezuzah on your home, no one will ever die. Death is something that was decreed upon man, and it's guaranteed. As they say, the only two things guaranteed is death and taxes. So it's going to happen one way or another. No one makes it out of this world alive. But the outlook has to be, number one, when there's something that's possibly going to happen, we have to remember that nothing is guaranteed until it happens. And therefore, we don't give up hope, and we believe with complete faith that things can change. The Talmud uses the phrase, even if a sharp sword is on someone's neck, they should never cease from asking God for mercy, which means it's never a time to say, oh, it's too late, let's give up, let's just move on. They've lived a long enough life. I know there was a rabbi, he said, when they were having the discussion of euthanasia, he said that one time he was at a hospital. There was a fellow who got into an accident, and he was in a serious condition, and the doctors were working on him trying to save his life. His sons came in, the victim's sons, the patient's sons came in. They were young, 20-year-olds. And he said after a while, they go over to the doctor, and they tell the doctor, they say, we, as in the sons, we had a meeting together over here, and we decided that our father has lived enough of his life with a nice experience, and there's no need to further work on him. It's okay to just let him go. And the doctor was shocked. He's like, we, the children, decided, like, does your father not get a say in this matter? Like, who are you to give an opinion regarding when his life should end? So I think until something happens, we have to look at every moment as a gift from God and appreciate it and believe that a miracle can happen, believe that things can change, and do what we can. But it doesn't mean that at the same time, once something happens, we have to know that the same God that gave it also takes it back. It's all part of God's bigger plan that ultimately people do pass away. So there's a time to celebrate, there's a time to pray, and there's a time to mourn. If, unfortunately, something happens, we shouldn't look back and say, oh, our prayers were in vain. They were a waste of time. Next time, I'm not even going to pray because I see it didn't help this time. We try the best we can. And if it doesn't happen, we say, well, God's plans were a little different, and we appreciate the gift that God gave us for the time we had it. I think today it's a lot easier for people when we don't have something, is when we realize how much we need it and we cease to appreciate it when we have it. So when someone is given a lot of wealth and success, they feel like, oh, it's just because I'm smart. That's the way it's always going to be. I'm always going to be rich and on top of the world. Then also when it's taken away, they feel like, how dare God remove all this from me? Instead of them saying, wow, that was amazing that I had this gift for these amount of years without me even deserving it. I'm not any better than someone else, and yet I had it for so many years for free. That was so beautiful. So when we're given a gift of a loved one, we should appreciate it every moment that we have. But if they're taken away, instead of complaining the rest of our lives, why were they taken away? We could say, that was so amazing that God gave me this gift for all these years to have this loved one in my life. I really appreciate, what would my life be without that? So thank you, God, for giving me that gift during the time that I was able to share.
Thank you, well said.
Yeah, you're welcome. But unless someone has another question, I would just touch a little more on what you were saying about why do good people suffer sometimes. And of course, there's many classes given on this, but I think an easy way to look at it is we're never going to be able to understand God's mind. Meaning, God is not just a human mind a lot bigger or a lot stronger. Just as much as your pet cat will never understand geometry, forget about calculus, it's not even in their capacity for something that they could learn. We as human beings will never understand God's ways fully. It's just beyond any appreciation, it's not something that we could grasp in any way that makes sense. To some degree, you could say intentionally, God does not allow us to understand what he does so that we can show care and compassion. If we knew why God does everything, we wouldn't be able to care for someone that's poor. We wouldn't be able to say a prayer for someone that's sick. We would say, oh, I know exactly why they're sick and why they're poor. And I know why this person doesn't have children. I know why this person is suffering. And therefore, I'm not going to give them my compassion because I see it the way God does. God says, my job I can handle by myself. What I want you to do as a human being is care for someone else, be there for them, feel bad, feel their pain, feel their suffering, feel like there's unjust, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that we have to denounce God because we are upset with what he does. God wants us to say, God, please help this individual, please do better, please heal them. That is not coming from a lack of faith, that's coming from complete faith. If I believe that God is the one that did it and God is the one that can help, therefore I plead to God and ask him, God, it's not fair. Why is this being done? So you could say God intentionally does it, that we don't understand why people suffer, so that we will do our part, which is to show care and compassion.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes, my pleasure.
Ina,
Thank you. That was a great class. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.